It's my great pleasure to welcome my colleagues for the second of our second seminar in our COVID-19 crisis seminar series. We had a very successful seminar by Jean-Pierre Cabestan last week, and now we have colleagues Chris Sliwinski and Dionysios Stivas who will be presenting their work on COVID-19 as a global security issue. This is the second of 4 seminars, and it must be said, many related events around our university and of course across the world. So it gives my great pleasure really to see this collaboration between, I suppose, you know, I would say if I said an established academic and a rising star, this would be you know, one way of describing this couple, but clearly Chris and Dionysios are going to now talk to us then about the COVID-19 crisis as a global security issue. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, hello. Welcome everyone.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start. And I'm going to start by giving you kind of an introduction. First of all, I will say a few words about how our work came about, and then walk you through some of the very basics of security studies and its approach to social phenomena, which is particularly useful, I think, for those of you who are not experts in security studies. And then my colleague, Dr. Stivas, will take over, and he will take you even more into a detailed account of how particular societies responded to COVID-19 as a global security issue. And then it will again be over to me, and I will finish up by suggesting some general global implications. So, a few words about our project. By the way, if you can see it probably from our title slides, the COVID-19 is overshadowing the globe. That was the idea for this entering slide, because it is. We live in a world where suddenly no other topics seem to matter. It's all about COVID-19. How did our project came about? We were in fact invited to submit a paper to an e-journal, which is hosted by a platform, 21st Century Global Dynamics. I give you the links below here in that slide. This platform is in fact a child, one might say, of a global studies consortium, the one that is basically run by University of California, Santa Barbara. This is a very interesting platform, mostly dedicated to research on global issues. So you will find that a lot of very interesting topics. Obviously, COVID-19 is relevant when we're talking about global issues. So let me now walk you through some of the very basic notions regarding security studies, so that you can understand why security studies angle is relevant when talking about COVID-19. We security studies scholars like to brag that you can't really make sense of world politics without a security studies angle, or security angle, to be more broad. You know, every day somewhere in the world people are killed, they're starved, tortured, raped, impoverished, imprisoned, displaced, or denied education, all in the name of security. Security also features speeches of politicians, and pundits, newspaper columns, radio waves, TV images are full of it. In other words, it is a topic that we are exposed to on a daily basis. This obviously makes security fascinating, sometimes a deadly, but definitely an important and relevant topic. The second thing that I would like to draw attention to, something you've got to bear in mind, is that like many other notions in social sciences, security is a contested topic, a concept, not only in terms of definition, but also in terms of how it's practiced and what it means for particular societies and even particular groups within societies. Enough is to say that security means different things to different people under different circumstances. This obviously makes security a very interesting and at the same time a challenging field to study. Also, importantly, it's not only an intellectual pursuit. Security, in fact, is something that happens to real people in real time, and it deals with very real problems. So it's got this pragmatic side to it, which prominently features practitioners of international politics. You might say that really security is profoundly political. That is to say, it plays a vital role in deciding who gets what, when, and how. And obviously, I'm referring to Laswell's definition. Now, fourthly, security is a very powerful political tool. What this means is, and this is something that Dr. Stivas is going to talk about later on, it is very helpful for some groups within societies when they claim power, when they claim money, when they claim attention. Obviously, if you think about intelligence agencies and their role in national securities, that would be just one example of many. Now, so what is security? How would you define security? Obviously, there are a number of definitions of security. However, in most cases, when we introduce students to the concept of security, we deal with a very general definition. We say that security is commonly associated with alleviation of threats to cherished values. Mind you, not just any threats, but especially those threats that, when left unchecked, threaten the survival of a particular referent object in the near future. So this brings your attention to the relationship between security and survival. These notions are not the same. They're not interchangeable. You might say, as other scholars claim, like, for example, Kenneth Booth, that security is survival plus. So that is survival, which is an existential condition. But then we also, when you talk about security, we're also talking about some sort of cherished political and social ambitions that the referent object should be able to go after. Briefly speaking, there are two very basic approaches to security. One that is commonly associated with political realism, that treats security as a commodity. To put it simple, the more power you have, the more power you accumulate, the more secure you are in the international system. The second one is non-traditional. Let's say there are a couple of avenues here. Some would be relevant to social constructivism, other to liberalism. Basically, security is based on justice, it's based on human rights. It really derives from relationships between actors very often when you introduce students to this topic, you give an example of relationship between United States and Iran, or United States and United Kingdom, when you talk about nuclear arsenals and national security strategies regarding nuclear weapons. For some reason, UK, which is much stronger, much more powerful than Iran, is not considered an enemy of United States, right? Because it's about relationship between these actors. And last but not least, when it comes to this introduction, whose security? Obviously, when you talk about security, you have to remember what I said 5 minutes ago. Security means different things for different people under different circumstances. Here comes the concept of a referent object. Every time you think about security, you have to define whose security, so the referent object of your analysis. This will define the threats. And normally in security studies, we would talk about states as traditional referent objects, so those threats that threaten the survival and cherished values of states. But with the after the Second World War, with the evolution of security studies and international relations and non-traditional security approaches, other concepts have emerged. Obviously, that human beings, individuals, can be treated as a referent object. Therefore, the idea of human security, which is, by the way, generally the level of analysis that we're going to apply here as well. Society can be treated as a referent object as well, for a reason which is obvious. People do treat larger groups within which they live not only instrumentally, but they actually identify with them. Therefore, you can talk about societal security. Society could be at the level of nation, of course. You could use a level of analysis approach, the traditional approach that we teach our students, so from individual through domestic, international to the global, or the planet Earth, which would obviously have this important ecological resonance. COVID-19, I think, as a security issue, is relevant to all those levels of analysis. Obviously, it is relevant to human security, because at the end of the day, we are talking about 5,590,358 infected cases as of today, and 347,907 deaths worldwide. So obviously individuals pay the price, but so do communities, so do societies. So do whole economies. I mean, if you think about it, it is really a global, multi-level security issue. And now, before I give the floor to my colleague, let me just say a few more words about how the international community has been assessing risks such as COVID-19. You're probably aware that every year the World Economic Forum releases the Global Risks Report as part of the Global Risks Initiative, ahead of its annual meeting, which takes place in Davos in Switzerland. And this report is sort of a litmus test of how the international community perceives risks, global risks. It is based on a global risks perception survey where nearly 1,000 decision makers from the public sector, private sector, academia, and civil society assess the risks that face the world. So, regardless of the number of those risks, for example, back in 2011 there were 37 risks, whereas in 2009 there were only 20. What is significant that the majority of the surveyed experts have not really indicated the risks concerned with the public health as particularly urgent. Typically, it was the lack of geopolitical stability, economic downturns, or climate change. Even the 2020 which sees the 15th edition of this report, it does talk about risks that stem from viruses and bacteria, categorizes them as societal, but it talks about them, and this is taken from this very report. You can see that circled in the red, infectious diseases. They are seen as bearing high impact, but in fact lower than average likelihood, even as late as of 2020 when this report was published. So we can be sure that this is definitely going to change with the next report, 2021, and the subsequent ones. What we are seeing now, according to many experts, is not only pandemics, but most importantly, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. You remember 1929, 1935, or as some actually scholars claim, the Great Depression ended in the 50s after the Second World War. So we see more and more experts, we hear more and more experts claiming that this might be as bad or maybe even worse. We don't know yet, it's too early to estimate. We see economic shutdowns of whole countries, we see millions of jobs that have already been lost, we see countless small and medium enterprises that have gone bankrupt, and that's just the beginning. Now, this has prompted many political leaders around the world, including President Trump, to in fact declare a war on virus, which, by the way, somehow, at least to me, resembles the war on terror from back 2001. So this should, we think, inevitably prompt us to think about non-traditional security threats, diseases, obviously being one of them, as a serious challenge to global security, albeit within a context of human security that has gained a lot of prominence among scholars, security scholars, in recent years. So with that, I pass it on to my colleague, who's going to go into much more detail.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, dear participants. So in political science, to explain how an issue develops, a soft security issue that enters into the security realm and is dealt as such by politicians or by the authorities, political scientists use the securitization theory. Securitization theory has been developed by some scholars in Copenhagen School of Security Studies back in 1998. And these scholars claim that for a securitization to become successful, for the securitization of a soft security issue like that of COVID-19 to become successful, there are three steps that have to be taken or to be observed. First, we have to have a securitization narrative or a security speech act. Some actors, usually political actors, they have to go to the public and declare an issue as an existential and imminent threat. On the basis of this narrative, they claim the right to adopt measures, emergency, extraordinary measures, security measures, that under normal circumstances they would be never be able to take or even to think. Copenhagen School theorists claim that there is another element important for a securitization to be successful. It has to be accepted by the targeted audience. And the targeted audience in most of the cases is the general public to which political actors, they are accountable and they base their legitimacy on them. In my PhD thesis that I defended successfully back in December, I worked on this securitization theory, and like other scholars before me, I tried to explain a little bit more the empirical framework of securitization and to add a comprehensive securitization empirical framework that can capture different forms and different occasions of securitization. Despite the potential of this framework to catch many different securitizations, it misses, the list, of course, it is not exhaustive, but it misses how the current crisis has been securitized by several, in several states and from several authorities. How COVID-19 has been securitized can be explained as an securitization under some administrations. A securitization, as Dr. Sliwinski explained some years ago, occurs when important social phenomena are declared security relevant and consequently treated as such. And as we have observed, several states across the world, several leaders, several authorities, several policymakers, they have doubted at the beginning the existence of the threat and the seriousness of the threat. Subsequently, they had to securitize very severely the issue. Some months ago, myself and Dr. Nicholas Smith from Ningbo Nottingham University, we claimed in the conversation in the national interest that another form of securitization exists, the hyper-securitization. And hyper-securitization is exactly what China has performed after the 23rd of January of 2020. Hyper-securitization is extra securitization. It's taking measures much more serious and severe that usually are taken under the securitization context. Another form of securitization that I haven't predicted in my thesis, but it looks that it is very efficient, very effective in the current situation, is that of preemptive securitization, preemptive silent or non-silent securitization. And this, as I will I will explain in more details later, is what has been performed by Taiwan and Hong Kong. But let me address some case studies, starting with mainland China, and see the approach, the response of China through the spectrum of the securitization theory. As we all know, the Chinese authorities were aware that something was going on from November or December, something was going on in Wuhan. Possibly they didn't know precisely how serious, how severe was the threat, but despite their lack of knowledge, they focused on controlling dissidents, and they repressed the whistleblowers instead of trying to control the spread of this virus in Wuhan. President Xi was informed only, I think, on the 7th of January about the existence of this virus. And it was only on the 20th of January that the Chinese authorities, they admitted publicly that this virus can be spread from human to human. During all this time, narratively and in terms of measures, nothing serious had happened. It was like trying to securitize the issue, trying to ease the anxieties of of the Chinese public, of the Chinese people, but also of the international community, that it's just a virus, that we are going to control it. After a few days, on the 23rd of January, when the Chinese authorities realized that the threat and the virus is serious and it is not possible to be controlled, they started to impose some of the most serious, most severe securitizing measures that the humanity has seen in recent years. Extensive public monitoring was imposed. The whole region of Hubei and the city of Wuhan were quarantined, aggressive use of quarantines. Artificial intelligence was used, technology, drones, coronavirus hospitals, tailor-made hospitals just for coronavirus patients, they were built just in 10 days. So a huge resources were moved in very short time to deal with this case. Of course, there was no transparency in how the Chinese regime approached the issue. There was no transparency, and the speed of the response is also controversial. But by the 19th of March, the Chinese authorities, mainland Chinese authorities, they claimed that their attempts, their securitization was fruitful. Since then, they report very few cases every day and almost no deaths. China at the moment counts 84,000 confirmed cases and almost 5,000 deaths. By the beginning of March, China was standing on the top of the list with countries of the list counting the confirmed cases and the deaths in countries. Now it's number 14 or 15. Many countries across the world have overpassed China. But from a viewpoint of securitization, we see that at the beginning, they tried to assecuritize the issue, the authorities, local and the central authorities, and then after the 23rd of January, they proceeded with hyper-securitizing the issue. The success of this approach is controversial. Other countries have had better success, as we will see later, other administrations. In the European Union as a whole and the European Union institutions also tried or didn't pay so much attention to the issue at its onset. Instead of focusing on taking common measures and common policy across the European Union to deal with the crisis, at the beginning of February, middle of February, all the leaders of the European Union institutions, they went to Greece and they embarked in a helicopter to monitor how Turkey was trying to send thousands of refugees over the land borders between Greece and Turkey. Italy and Spain had started by that time, were suffering by COVID-19, many deaths and many confirmed cases. So they didn't pay so much attention, and of course they were not very well prepared. This could be also justified on the fact that health policy is not even a shared policy between the European Union and the member states. It's just a complementary policy. But then in terms of solidarity, we saw in this crisis that the European Union member states, they lack solidarity. The southern member states, and especially Italy and Spain, especially Italy at the beginning of the crisis there, they were asking for support from the other member states, but they didn't receive any support. And this could be understandable because the countries were unprepared, the enemy was unknown, and they were probably trying to keep the resources, medical resources, medicines for themselves instead of helping their neighbors. Solidarity understandable, but confiscation of equipment, masks and medicines at the borders of some states, it's not understandable at all. Some countries European Union countries confiscated and didn't let some medicines to pass from one country to another or to the countries that needed them most. This is not solidarity at all in the European Union context. Solidarity also didn't show the approach on corona boards of some member states from the northern of the European Union, which asked for a strict conditionality in order to issue these corona boards. And probably you all remember that there was tension between Italy and Spain, especially Italy, and Germany and the Netherlands, especially the Netherlands. A few days ago, we have another attempt from the French and Franco-German attempt to issue coronavirus recovery fund. a fund that would offer grants to EU regions and sectors hit hardest by the pandemic. Very, very nice, very good initiative, but we have 4 member states, again, Denmark, Austria, Netherlands, and Sweden, that they do not agree with this recovery fund, and they ask for strict conditionality and to take the loans for loans approach. So in some, we see that the European Union did not show a common response to this crisis. We had no coordination at the beginning, and even now there's no coordination. And it is this coronavirus crisis also shows that the European Union is far from further integrating. Severe lockdowns in some countries and voluntary social distancing in others creates big difference in the numbers of confirmed cases, and also makes possible the reestablishment of border checks. Countries that do very well with the dealing with the coronavirus crisis, European Union countries, would not allow freely countries with many cases to send their citizens to them. So the free movement of citizens within the European Union is endangered through this crisis. At the UK, a country that recently left the European Union, we see also a strange approach. The authorities were aware that something wrong is going on in Italy and in China, but instead of trying to take some preemptive measures and taking the situation seriously, we had some advices for voluntary social distancing on the 3rd of February, and some experiments with this controversial herd immunity approach. These experiments went on until the 20th of March, when the sharp rise in the numbers of confirmed cases and deaths forced the administration of Boris Johnson to impose more enforceable social distancing measures, nationwide lockdowns, and to order the pubs and the restaurants across the country to close. But before doing that, on the 10th of February, the government had declared coronavirus as a serious and imminent threat to public health and gave itself powers to forcibly quarantine people. This what's happening on the 10th of February is a clear case of securitization, a declaration of this soft security issue as a serious and imminent threat, and a basis for giving powers to forcibly quarantine people. Again, we see, like in China here a not successful approach from asecuritization to not hyper-securitization, but securitization proper in the case of the UK. The United States is also a strange approach. The intelligence had already from November warned about a cataclysmic and out of control disease in China, in Wuhan. Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, tried to speak to President Trump about the outbreak on the 18th of January, but President Trump ignored him and kept ignoring such warnings for many weeks to come. The United States had their first case on the 20th of January, and on the 24th of January, President Trump thanked China and President Xi for his transparency and effort in tackling the coronavirus. Now bring this declaration and statement a few months later and compare it with the current statements of President Trump. For a few months, President Trump declared that the virus was under control. He thought that the virus is under control, so he even hosted 5 rallies across the United States. It's attending thousands of attendees in confined spaces. A clear attempt of asecuritizing the issue from the American president, of course. The rest of the administration tried to warn him and to warn the people, but he didn't. Trump assured the public against worrying about the coronavirus, assured the public and the stock market that everything is fine. He even advised the public to consume disinfectants to fight the virus. So a strange approach from the side of President Trump. A strange approach also in terms of restrictions, travel restrictions. The first country, of course, that was under restriction was China, but later on he started to restrict traveling from Europe. Surprisingly, from all the countries of Europe except of the UK, while the UK was the number of confirmed cases in the UK was rising by day by day. Very strange approach. It was only on the 13th of March, many months later, that Trump declared a national emergency and promised a new website to link the Americans to testing sites. This delay and this denouncement, this he doubt about the existence of the threat by the side of President Trump has caused so far, has contributed the United States to have more than 1.5 million confirmed cases as of today and almost 100,000 deaths. So all these cases that I mentioned so far were not very successful. This approach from asecuritization to hypersecuritization or securitization proper has been seen to be not effective. But coming back to this part of the world, we have two cases, Taiwan and Hong Kong, that they were very successful. And these cases proceeded with preemptive securitization. The Taiwanese authorities, they sent already from the middle of December, experts in Wuhan, when they were aware that something wrong is going on in that place, they sent medical experts, which informed them that the threat, the virus, is serious, and asked them to take some preemptive measures. These preemptive measures were not strict quarantines like in the rest of the world. The Taiwanese authorities, they just advised soft social distancing to their people. They restricted entry of Chinese tourists in Taiwan, and they rationed face masks to all the population. Surprisingly, in Taiwan, the universities and the schools did not have to close like in the rest of the world. Just the Chinese New Year holidays, they were extended by 2 weeks. Some more advices for social distancing followed in April, when we had a very small rise of cases, but not of deaths. By the 8th of May, the Taiwanese can enjoy pro baseball games, which are open to fans since then. In terms of number, to see the success in numbers, Taiwan has recorded only 441 cases for 3 or 4 months, and being so close to the onset of the virus, and also having so many links with mainland China, so many travelers traveling from one place to the other, of course not as of 26th of January, and only 7 deaths. In terms of deaths confirmed cases ratio, Hong Kong did also very well. As of today, there are less than 1,070 cases and only 4 deaths. The measures were also here preemptive, kind of very, the borders there were borders restrictions imposed very early at the end of January. Voluntary social distancing was advised by the government, by the authorities. The people by themselves, they all wore face masks, although the government at the beginning did not advise to use face masks. Universities and schools went on to online teaching, and the enterprises also took this work from home approach. public health system also seems to be very effective in Hong Kong, considering that only 4 people died out of more than 1,000. So in these 2 cases, we see a preemptive securitization that it is more, it appears to be more effective than the asecuritization to hypersecuritization approach taken by China, the United States, and the UK. Okay, Chris.
So thanks very much. I will try to summarize and take us back to a more general level. The future, briefly. Now, to us, one of the fundamental questions that social scientists should probably ask is whether this COVID-19 crisis is going to be a game changer or not. You might have heard numerous experts claiming that the world after COVID-19 is going to be different. We are going to emerge in some sort of different reality. So if you see, if you observe international relations and the international system, you might also notice that some significant players, such as the United States, started limiting its contacts with the rest of the world, at least temporarily. I'm thinking here about the ongoing economic competition with China, but also the US stance on WHO, or recently announced withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty. So all those things might prompt us to put forward this kind of hypothesis that the world is going to be very different. The fundamental categories in which I think from an international relations perspective and international security perspective you should think about is whether we're going to see the processes of globalization reversed. That is to say, more and more commentators started to, in recent weeks, they started talking about deglobalization. So the big question to us, does it make sense to actually talk about deglobalization? Is it likely? In other words, are the processes of globalization reversible? More generally, perhaps, will the future further empower nation states and limit the power of non-state actors, such as transnational corporations, which are the major proponents of the process of globalization? This is a trend that some have noticed in, say, recent years, that nation states seem to be more lively and kicking as a reaction to the processes of globalization. The third category in which you might think about the future is whether we're going to see a further revival of nationalism, therefore amid this well-identified sins of neoliberalism. And then finally, geopolitically speaking, are we going to continue observing the shift of global power from the West to the East? And what we think is that most likely, and we don't have a black cat and a crystal ball, so we cannot foresee the future, but most likely those things are not really going to happen. And for two basic reasons. Now, firstly, since 70s and 80s, most states have seized a great deal of power to non-state actors, and consequently the regulatory capacities have greatly diminished, and therefore the power in terms of influencing global processes have become limited. Secondly, there appears to be a severe deficiency among top policymakers when it comes to long-term strategic thinking. In fact, I would claim most governments around the world turn to mere administrators who react rather than shape or influence global politics. Which is why the role of strategy, which is understood as optimal long-term planning, has greatly diminished. All of this, I think, gives reasonable grounds to claim that, firstly, security has turned a somewhat undervalued discipline. Secondly, that contemporary societies have turned depoliticized, and perhaps even slightly over vulnerable, that is to say, under security aware. And that's it. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
Good.
Yeah, they can see me also.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
They cannot see you.
Perhaps I'll ask a first question, and then we'll move on to Zoomland, if that's okay. My question is more a comment and a question, as befits the tradition. The comment is it's about securitization, and it's interesting. I mean, thanks for your presentation. It was really very, very stimulating. It got me thinking about concepts and adjectives, because here we've got asecuritization, hypersecuritization, preemptive securitization, and I absolutely totally got what you talked about, the distinctions between them.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether, and I get this is going back to one of the old themes in political science, is a concept in trouble if it has to rely on its adjectives? You know, and that's just a sort of, it's a comment rather than a question, because I don't have an answer to it actually. I don't really have an answer to that, but it struck me with your fine distinctions, and you know you operationalize these really well. So that was my sort of comment, and my question. In my case, I can't actually read my own handwriting, which is symptomatic of something going on. But no, actually, my question is about state capacity. And in a sense, what's interesting here in your presentation is, and it comes back to Chris's thing at the end. There is clearly something going on. There's clearly something going on about state capacities having been so weakened in the past that attempts to reinvent state capacity are variable. You know, maybe they work in some cases, and maybe this is where the adjectives might come in as well. You know, they work in some cases, but we see in others that, and particularly your examples from the European Union, Dionysios, we saw actually how, for all, it's not a question of willpower or not, I don't think, but in practical terms, there's been perhaps a weakening of state capacities and a weakening of the possibility to be strategic in those areas. Certainly in terms of foresight, it's an awful lot of academic work written on foresight. But can you actually have foresight in terms of health crises? Well, you can do to a certain degree, and you can do retrospectively, but how do you actually plan for many of these crises? That's a real issue, I think, that I don't have an answer for. So basically, it's a comment, and my question, I suppose, it's a loose question about state capacities.
Would you like to take more questions?
Or shall we just answer those two? Because I'm sure that both of us would like to say something. You want to start? Okay, quickly, yeah, adjectives. When I was a student, there was barely any concept of securitization. Now, both of us actually have developed other, well, we've investigated various phenomena within the concept of securitization. So the way I would put it to you is that within the great theorem of securitization, you might talk about various sub-phenomena. And that would be the one that I talked about, asecuritization, the one that Dionysios is talking about, hyper-securitization or pre-securitization. But I would say they all fall into the same pot, and that pot is a general phenomenon so well started already, which is securitization. As for your second question or comment, state capacities, well, I would say, I mean, I agree. This is not a simple phenomenon, and it would be a sweeping generalization. I do admit that perhaps in my comments here I might have sounded a bit too general, simply because I don't have enough time to go into details. Obviously, not in all areas states have totally lost their regulatory capacities, but I would say that in terms of economy, definitely they have. Now, you talk about health crisis, infectious diseases. This all goes down to contingency planning. And the way I see it, at least, and I'm highly critical of neoliberalism, the way I see it is that the current neoliberal model, which is pervasive not only in the Anglo-Saxon world, but in many other countries around the world, to a degree, of course, in Anglo-Saxon countries to a much higher degree, in other countries to a lesser degree. Still, you can identify elements of neoliberalism. In fact, I have also published on neoliberalism and EU. The problem is that you know, contingency planning seems to be not very cost effective. I mean, it's all about maximizing, optimizing here and now, and not really thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And should this happen, should a tragedy like the COVID-19 happen, then we simply discount this as a cost that has to be paid by the society against the future income. That's it. And that's my understanding, at least of one of the aspects of how, you know, contemporary societies and political elites operate, which is, I have to admit, the way I see it, at least, but that's my personal view, which is a shame. But
yes, in terms of conceptualization of securitization theory, indeed it seems to be problematic, especially the initial description of this theorem by Copenhagen School of Securitization Studies, 1998. They speak only about securitization and desecuritization. But this is because of there is so much literature on securitization since then, and many people write on this and they try to explain it. So yes, the initial formulation, perhaps it is a little bit problematic, and it leaves too much space for more explanation. For your last questions on how do you make plan for such situations, I think that now or in a few months we will know which countries, which administrations did very well. They saved their economy, and most importantly, they saved the lives of their people, and they had not a large number of confirmed cases. Administrations like Hong Kong and Taiwan, and the other countries could use this as examples, their approaches as example. Of course, the political system and also the tradition and culture that plays a very important role should also be taken into account, because in this approach of Taiwan and Hong Kong, maybe the tendency of the people to wear face masks and to keep social distancing and to observe the guidance of the authorities played a very important role. In Western democracies, it's very difficult for the people to abide with the quarantine rules, with the lockdowns. They don't even use face masks. They don't use face masks. They feel like their freedom is suppressed. A face mask in front of their nose and their mouth. But I think we could all learn in the future from these successful administrations.
Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. That's funny because at the beginning, just a word about securitization. At the beginning, the term securitization was used in a rather derogatory way, and then it has become a presentation, a very positive concept. So I don't know whether it's just maybe a comment on that, because it looks like to to over-securitize is something which is bad, to put it simply. And now it has become something which is very positive in view of the experience of various countries. Two or three remarks again in Hong Kong and Taiwan. You haven't mentioned the SARS crisis as the SARS crisis as a precedent, as a learning curve for those societies. The other thing is those societies have borders. Hong Kong, is an island. Japan is an island and it has borders. South Korea as well. And one thing about Hong Kong, there was a strike decided by the medical personnel, which forced Carrie Lam to close the border because she didn't want to close the border, and that helps, keeping the coronavirus under control. There are many factors. In the US, the rate of obesity has been really, a well-known factor, as opposed to Japan, where you have very few of those cases, so that's why it come out of very, very. But these border, the border criteria, I think, or variable is very important for the EU. The EU has no, within the Schengen area, there are no borders. People move around. Apart from what you said about, cultural differences, of course, I think it has played. And the other thing which has played a role, I think, in making countries pretty blind is power rivalry. You haven't mentioned at all. The Cold War, between the US and China, power rivalry has contributed to, to making both countries blind. China being opaque on the one hand, and Trump to be negligent or to focus on other issues. Final thing, you haven't mentioned the WHO, because who is going to replace the nation state? I think the conclusion you've reached is now nation states which are better organized than others. There was a theory not long ago that the nation state run by women did better. I know that's really far-fetched, but there are a number of cases which have been positive. But and who is going to replace the nation state? No one. And again, these crises has underscored the weaknesses of multilateral organizations, which may have been hijacked by one big country no one wants to name, or which we need to go through some kind of review and in order to improve its role. So I think we can't get out of the nation state, and that's the problem. And policymakers will have to learn from that crisis. Maybe it will be too late for many countries, but we will have no other choices to learn and to maybe strengthen the nation state. Sorry.
A lot of points. Thank you for your comments and your remarks. Indeed, they are very important determinants and variables of the success. I take them as comments, and I take as a question the one you mentioned about securitization as being important. I started to talk interrogatory about it because indeed it seems like it is not well covered or developed after 1998 as a theory, not as a practice. We see now that sometimes it is important to securitize not to hyper-securitize because it goes against liberties and rights of people in close to here. But it is important because it contains three elements. The narrative, through the narrative, the politicians can warn the people. The people then have knowledge about what is happening, what is coming. The measures that sometimes are also important, the extraordinary measures, when you deal with an invisible threat, with an imminent and existential threat at some, it looks like an existential threat, the current crisis. We have never seen this in the last 100 years, what happened now, or many countries to be shut down. But most importantly, it involves this kind of silent agreement between the general public and the politicians about the actual existence of the threat, which is very important in Western democracies, in liberal democracies, but it is a topic and a subject that could be further studied and examined in other regimes.
Yeah, let me also address very briefly. Thank you very much for your comments. Obviously, all very relevant and should be taken into account. We just didn't have enough time to talk about all the variables, but you're absolutely right. On borders, I would add that I mean, we still don't really know where this virus originated, right? So even if you think about the physical borders, I'm not sure they actually played a role, because if the virus started in this part of the world, it spread all over the world very quickly. So the physical borders, or the lack of thereof, it didn't really play a big role, the way I see it, which also talks about, you know, how globalized the world is. So my question is, I'm not sure to what extent borders can be a variable here, globally speaking, you know, by the end of the day. But certainly it is one of the factors. I'm simply not sure how important.
Well, the decision to close borders early on.
Oh, the decision to close borders early on.
Check people coming in.
Yeah. Okay. Which would, I suppose it would all. The case of my country, Poland, would also probably confirm that. Yes. As I tried to allude to US-China rivalry very briefly. Obviously, I mean, the US is now bashing China for all reasons, and I'm sure you're aware that some American political leaders recently decided to claim that China should pay back the United States for the destruction of the economy, which only goes back to my initial points. I mean, security is a side of contestation and a side of competition at the same time, because obviously this is framed as a security issue, survival of the nation, right? Which is even more why I think it's good to look at this crisis from a security vantage point. Thirdly, nationalism versus supranationalism. I mean, we have not really tried to arrive at any conclusion here. I do agree with you that, I mean, and I would also add, especially in case of European Union, what I've noticed is that you've got Euro enthusiasts who basically claim the crisis caused by COVID-19 is partly made worse because EU is not a full federation. Give more power to EU, then the crisis would be resolved easier. Guy Verhofstadt, for example, right? And then you've got Eurosceptics who say, no, only national states. So, everybody sees what they want to see, and everybody. Eurosceptics will see, no, this is the proof that international institutions are useless and you have to revert to national protection.
Okay, so thank you very much, Chris and Gian, for your very informative talk. I learned a great deal myself about the School of Copenhagen. And I understand that since you have been developing your own securitization concepts, we are about to see a Hong Kong BU School of Securitization. So I'm very excited about this. I have two questions for you. The first one is related to the links. So you have defined 3 approaches, and I'd like to know whether in your future research you want to link the nature of the regimes with the style of approach that you have seen, that you have defined. Securitization, hyper-securitization, and preemptive securitization. The second question is not only related to the nature of the regime, but the style of leadership. So can you make this type of link? This is something that you want to explore. And then, as the only female in this room, I feel compelled to say that, in fact, it's true. We may not be able to explain this, but maybe it's part of the question I've been asking you. Leadership. Do you see, exactly, is there a style of leadership that favors a particular approach, and which approach, according to you, has worked best so far? Thank you.
Very good question.
Oh, thank you. Nature of the regime and style of leadership for future research. Yes, we have applied for research funding from two different organizations to address these issues. Especially the one from leadership is one of the main research questions that we try to address. The motives of the leadership, the background, age of retirement sometimes. How close is the age of retirement in China? Somebody has done from the business school of HKBU, and we can use it. They found out that the closer some governor was to the age of retirement, the worst was the response to COVID.
Oh, yeah, so
The harsh.
The stricter, the
I
harsher.
said the other day when you
So, and the nature, we also try to address the nature of the regime, and we try to find out whether Western liberal democracies are more appropriate or less appropriate than authoritarian regimes to enforce and to make sure that the measures will apply. Because we see in many liberal democracies, many Western democracies, in the European Union, in the UK, that people react very badly against the quarantine measures. And they react very positively to conspiracy theories and fake news.
As well, nature of regime is one thing, but then also I think, you know, the societal attitude is another thing. There are societies like quasi-democratic societies like the one of Hong Kong, where people, because of the SARS experience as well, and you know, swine flu and the ones before, they're very, I wouldn't say obedient, but they're very disciplined. And you don't actually have to tell people in Hong Kong to put a mask on. They do it in spite of what the government says. And then you have people in say, even the United States, who, even though when told to wear a mask, they just say, oh, I don't care, right? And they do a COVID-19 party and they all infect one another. This is kind of a societal attitude that you know, has not much to do with the style of leadership. As for gender, obviously it's a good question, but to answer that, I think we would have to make a fundamental epistemological choice. Which kind of, for example, feminism do we want to go with? Is it liberal feminism, or is it orthodox feminism, which would dictate probably different conclusions? So that's something that, honestly, I would probably, me personally, would not like to go into, because that seems to be a controversial topic. But I do agree that it might be interesting to have a look at. Well, we haven't considered it, to be honest, as far as I'm aware.
No, I haven't.
No, but I do acknowledge your question, by all means. Yeah, it could be interesting.
So which approach has been more efficient in your perspective? Which one?
As I said, the preemptive securitization approach has been more effective, and on the basis of the current numbers, but things changing. If we get 100 imported cases tomorrow here, things will change, like in Singapore. Yeah. Singapore was the main example until the end of February, until the beginning of March, and now nobody's talking about Singapore. Or Japan was not very
Singapore is a failure.
Do we have any questions from our guests?
I still have Tom.
Okay.
There was some chat, chat.
Someone raised a hand, actually.
There are no questions in the chat?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's chat, there's six.
There's chat.
Yes, but they are not questions.
Okay.
Oh, what did they say?
I was testing the cell.
Okay. Do you have other questions?
I just have a comment, and then I'll hand over to you, Jean-Pierre, for a question. My comment is just, I wonder how we think of civil society in this, because I mean, there's always two readings for everything. But you could say, you know, and again, I'm going to defend my liberal democracies here. You could actually say, you know, I mean, France, for example. Let's take the French case. You know, about the Gilets jaunes, all those eruptions and everything, and yet during the confinement, actually, very, very little sort of attempt to transgress, if you like. Maybe it's because the rules, maybe because the fines were 135 euros, whatever. But in actual fact, you could say, by and large, in the French case at least, probably Britain as well, actually. I mean, once the confinement was actually in place, there's not much evidence of people not respecting it. So I think we should be careful about hitting, in a sense, an obedient populace, if you like, in Asia against the sort of rebellious civil society in Europe or the US. The US is maybe a different thing again. But, so I just wonder how we, you know, I suppose in a sense, we need to be measured about these terms, but they are, it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to investigate. That was a comment.
Especially that now in Germany, by the way, you have, I think last week, 500,000 people in Stuttgart against the lockdown, which is really, and the biggest number of, I wouldn't call them conspiracy theory followers, but the biggest number of skeptics when it comes to the lockdown these days, I think, is among German doctors of all societies in Europe. German.
Yeah, so much to sort of break into pieces the cliché about the disciplined Germans.
Yes.
I think the first thing I would add is, I'm sure you've heard of it. I mean, everybody should read Albert Camus' The Plague to know and better understand how people behave when you have an epidemic. It changes your life. I mean, I reread it a few weeks ago. I read it when I was a teenager, and it's so much to the point. How people behave. You have also your exit strategy, and people trying to. I mean, you've got all sorts of behaviors, but you have to adjust. Now, it's true that some societies, that's my own view about Chinese society. They tend to put security ahead of freedom. But it's also a cliche you have to be careful with. One thing you haven't discussed is the language. Well, you alluded to the war, the language. And two neighbors, France and Germany. Macron and Angela Merkel use very, very different languages, and that's something which is quite interesting. Whether it has an impact on the way the society reacts, and on the way you mentioned the audience acceptance or education. I think it's very important because at the beginning, a lot of people in front were critical of using the term war. I mean, in his initial speech, he used the term, the concept of war at least 12 to 14 times. That's a bit too heavy. But eventually, people, yes, you're right. I mean, people sort of accepted that it was something very serious, and they had to abide by the rules. But the language is something interesting. Now, you said another thing I wanted to mention. You mentioned the Eurobonds as being a non-starter. You haven't mentioned the latest decision made by, again, Macron and Merkel.
The Coronavirus Recovery Fund.
Yes, the 500 billion euros. Did you mention it? I forgot. Because that's, but again, it's a sort of disputes within the EU
or against
whether we're going to find a compromise. I hope we will. But so the EU is not out. It's not completely out. I think a number of countries, member states, have a vested interest to keep the EU in place and to keep it relevant for the future of because they want to keep the euro, they want to keep the cohesion and so on. So they need. I mean, it's a fight for survival for the EU, and that's very serious because otherwise, so they still. I think I still bet that the EU itself can put its house in order eventually and find some agreement, even if there are different ways of looking at the EU. So that's something I wanted to add to the debate because we're far from out of it. There was something else. No, that's for the country. You want to react to that?
Yes, in my PhD thesis, I was commenting on the migration crisis, on the refugee crisis, as a danger, as a threat, not only me, but also leaders from across the member states, as a threat to European, to furthering the project of European integration. Because from the viewpoint of securitization, again, some countries securitize the migration crisis, the refugee crisis, like Greece, like Hungary, the UK, while some countries, they treated it as a good occasion, like in Germany, they kind of invited refugees to go there. Now we see another crisis, another threat, another soft security threat, not a war. The European Union was built to not create any war anymore against in between the countries of Europe. But we see another soft security issue that has been developed as a crisis within the European Union and possibly a danger to the project of European integration. If they cannot make their minds to tackle, to control such important, existential, important threat, how will they deal in the future with other kind of threats and important issues? I have a question, I think.
Yes, we have a question from Martin John, actually. Goes like this, yeah. Summation, the player, summation is of the opinion that the PRC is making the move in Hong Kong regarding national security law now, because the communist leadership is of the opinion that China is recovering faster than all other from COVID-19, and so there would be less appetite for standing up against China internationally. Do you see other major powers who might be making some strategic moves during this opportune time?
And that's a question addressed to me as an expert on China. I think this is a question that should be addressed to Professor Cabestan, really. I'm not so sure. I mean, I would have to really think about it. Other countries that might make strategic moves. I'm not sure I understand the question well. Do you see other major powers who might be making some strategic moves during this opportune time? But I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure, Martin, what you mean by opportune time.
Because no one is going to protest against it.
Ah, right. So the China is proving that we're so good, we're so effective.
Yes.
Our model is the prevailing model around the world, and so no one is going to stand.
There would be fewer protests.
In Hong Kong or around the world?
Well,
In Hong Kong.
Martin said in Hong Kong, but around the world there might be an opportunity for other states to start something.
I mean, I'm not an expert on Hong Kong. My only reading of the current situation is, and I'm probably not original here, is that really Beijing made the move because of the upcoming election to let go. They simply want to have as much, peace as possible. But what I also, okay, Martin, to answer your question, what I also put forward in my other paper regarding Hong Kong, the short paper, was that, and it's also again not original, is that not only Simon Chen is claiming that, but Brian Fong as well. I mean, it's obvious if you live in Hong Kong. Hong Kong has become kind of a ground zero when it comes to competition between the US and China. I mean, it's obvious. My understanding is that the US will use Hong Kong as an argument, as a tool in ongoing competition with China, be it as a political tool or an economic tool or other kinds of tools. So I'm not sure if this is what you meant, but I definitely think that Hong Kong is relevant, and that definitely US will try to use this to its advantage. Other European states, probably not that much, because they don't see themselves as global players. Most European countries, even EU as a whole, its rhetoric is, yeah, we're a global actor, but in reality, if you read what diplomats from all over the world say, well, in reality, you want to know what's happening in Europe, you talk to the British, you talk to the Germans, you talk to the French, but do you really talk to the European Commission? Yeah, you do, but what does it really mean? What does it really matter? I'm not too sure, right? So I probably haven't answered your question. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I understood it. I understood it well, but definitely Hong Kong is relevant. That's what I want to say.
Can I ask a naughty question to finish with? And well, it's one of those questions that postgrads always ask or whatever. But so you presented us the securitization, and you made a very convincing case. You've given us some nice adjectives that have operationalized it well. And actually, preemptive securitization, I agree, is best. It works pretty well, actually, to me, in response.
For the time being.
But I suppose in a sort of Talcott Parsons sort of comment. I mean, can you falsify securitization? Is it something that is so attractive because it can't actually be disproved? question, a comment, you could say, the problem with a concept like securitization, which incidentally I find very
the question to Ole Weaver, really.
But yeah, I mean, it's a more general question to the scientific community. But I suppose the problem with some concepts is that it's actually quite difficult to, you can pin them down and define them, but can you actually falsify them? In other words, can you say, well, securitization actually does not exist under these conditions? Maybe you can do. But, so is securitization important because when it's mobilized, it's convincing? But does that necessarily mean that we can, in a sense, can we find, of course, we can find areas where securitization hasn't been mobilized. So that's not quite the same thing. It's not quite the same thing as falsifying, in a sense, securitization as a concept. I mean, I don't think there's an answer to it. It's a bit like with Europeanization, or we're in globalization. The first question to ask is a bit more this concept stretching sort of thing. Are these concepts stretched so much that in actual fact you can't actually disprove them, or you can't really challenge them because there's always some variety that can come back and seem like convincing actually. So I don't know.
So you're referring to Popperian falsification, really?
I'm not saying specifically to sort of falsificate, can you actually properly falsify this concept? But I'm just saying, we need to be a little bit careful, I guess, with all of these concepts in terms of explaining too much by the concept. Because, or we need to make sure that what are the boundaries? I mean, what does the concept in a sense not explain? And then it becomes much tougher.
Okay, so it's a very theoretical question, and I think it invites a very advanced debate. It invites a very advanced debate. My initial reaction would be that I think securitization has proved quite useful in explaining a number of phenomena that has happened, especially in liberal democracies, but actually also in non-liberal, in non-democratic systems, in many years in the past, let alone after the end of the Cold War. And now, say what we do when we try to expand the concept of securitization and add those different sub-securitizations like a-securitization, or we're kind of pushing an envelope. And yes, it's possible that at some point it's not going to hold water, perhaps. But what better way to test it? I mean, you gotta push the envelope till a certain, I think, point above which that it's not useful anymore.
That's a good answer. I mean, I think actually that's a very good answer. I mean, in a sense, you've mobilized this in a pretty convincing way to show that it's a nice way of describing the different responses that have been adopted, by the different
point being, it obviously is just one side of the coin. So we don't attempt to explain everything with the concept of securitization because it's not possible. It only explains a part of social phenomena.
I might say, if I'm sort of the chair, which I suppose I am in a way, I mean, I'm very happy to have welcomed the second one of our seminars. It's been a fascinating exchange. We had Professor Kebis now we've had Dr. Sliwinski and Dr. Stivas. I'm going to be the next victim.